I'm going to be talking a little bit about the differences between the Ascender chassis and the SCX10 chassis. They're very similar platforms, but can be configured very differently. Ascender is pretty new to the market, and as of now is the only real challenger to Axial's SCX10 market. There are several SCX10s you can purchase at this point. I chose to compare the Ascender chassis to the Dingo chassis for the SCX10. I went with the Dingo because it is the shortest chassis that Axial provides for the SCX10, and the Ascender with its adjustable chassis in its current form here as a K5 Blazer, it's its largest, and at its smallest wheelbase it is approximately the size of the Dingo. So that's why I chose to compare these two. Other than that, the chassis aren't too much different, just spacing and the way things are spread out on them. So I'm going to pop these tops off and start comparing this Ascender chassis as you see it to the SCX10 chassis. Both of these trucks are kit versions and were built 100% the way the manual suggests. They both come with the stock kit options and nothing much more. If anything is different, I will be noting it and explaining why I did such. And I won't be talking about any custom configurations, as these are stock mods. I want to talk about how they come stock out of the box. So here goes the Ascender versus SCX10 chassis comparison.
Team Baxter.
I'm going to go from front to back, starting with one vehicle at a time, and go from one vehicle to another, comparing how they are and how they worked. So we're going to start from the front and go all the way to the back. In the front we have these little tow hitches, and I'm sure they aren't intended for any heavy use. I have been towed out of certain places with these, but they do pop under a lot of stress. A little stronger than you would actually think, but they are present on both models. They are in front and back, but being that I'm working from front to back, I'm just dealing with the fronts right now. On the bumper, both vehicles have spaces for lights to be installed. You can see the two little holes right there, one on each side of the Vaterra bumper, and the same thing goes for the SCX10 bumper with two slots for LEDs. Both are unprotected slots on both models. In the SCX10 I do have them installed. I chose not to install them on the Vaterra just because, no specific reason. The Axial model also features light buckets in front, two on this model. The Vaterra model does not feature any light buckets up front, nor does it feature a way to install light buckets up front, which is not a big problem for most. Most who want to install any light buckets or fixtures will just drill them into this bumper or get a bumper that will fit, but we're dealing with stock configurations right now, so that's that. So just behind the bumper in both models we have the steering servo, but we have them both set up in drastically different ways. The Axial setup comes pretty standard with the servo mounted on the axle. So you can see the chassis flexes independent of the servo. The servo actually sits on the axle and turns the wheels left and right. On the Vaterra model, the servo is chassis mounted, meaning that it is off of the axle. Gives you a little bit higher ground clearance and a few other benefits, but some people like these chassis mounted servos, some people like the axle mounted servos. A lot of the crawler guys like the chassis mounted servos because it gets the servo up off of the axle, kind of keeps the parts kind of out of the way a little bit, gives you a little bit more clearance and all. I'm kind of impartial myself, but just two different ways of getting that servo on there and getting it mounted Still behind the bumpers on both vehicles. Now we're dealing with the wheels. These are Axial stock rip saws that come with all of their vehicles. This is their Axial branded tire. They have this in 1.9 and 2.2 variations, and this ships with most all of the 1.9s. Now they're starting to change up and ship some Trepidors and I think some BF Goodrich crawler tires, but for a long while these were the only tires that would come with the Axial 1.9s. They do okay. Lots of people despise these tires. I think they're a good intro tire. They're good all around. They kind of get you out of what you need to. They're not the best tire on the market, but I don't think they're the worst. They do as advertised and they perform as advertised. They're just a good all-around tire. They're much better if they're in the R35 compound, the stickier compound from Axial. There's a big difference in the two compounds from Axial, and those are the rip saws. As I said, some people love them and some people hate them. The rip saws are sitting on Axial glue-on wheels. I have since moved away from gluing on my wheels, but this is actually the first crawler kit that I assembled, and coming from the bashing scene, we always glue the wheels. So the wheels are glued here. Nothing special about these plastic wheels. They come with Axial stock vehicles, and they have a hex hub, plastic wheels. The Ascender also comes with glue-on wheels. Here they are right here. As you can see, I never took them out of the bag. I'm not really a big fan of gluing on tires anymore. Makes it supremely hard to get them off. So just that reusability factor, that's enough for me to not use glue on wheels anymore. So I set these on bead locks for those reasons. These are the stock tires. They're Vaterra branded TSLs. I have a little history with TSLs. I'm not the biggest fan, but I have to say these are performing excellent. Great combination with the vehicle. I don't know really what's going on, but they far outperform these Ripsaw tires in every way possible. As I said, these Ripsaws are good all around. TSLs are pretty good all around, but these TSLs are pretty great on rocks. And that's what we like to crawl, and that's probably the best application. So these Vaterra branded TSLs are working pretty good. I'm a big fan of pit bulls myself, so if I ever switch up, these will be going to pit bulls, but I don't see a need to switch up. These are pretty great tires with the stock foams. The Axial foam is a little softer than the Vaterra foam, and another big thing is, since this dingo, I've stopped venting my tires for the water play. When you tend to do a lot of water play, your tires take on a lot of water and it grazes the foam. So now I tend to run sealed setups. There is no air running in and out of this tire, so that foam would look as good as new as the day I put it in there if my tire is sealed up correctly. And this foam is probably looking and smelling pretty bad right about now, as you can never properly dry it, especially with the wheels glued on. So those are the tires. Moving on to the shocks. I actually had to bring the stunt double in for the SCX10 shocks, and even these are upgraded, but they are the kit version shocks. These are Axial's 1.9 shocks. These are aluminum, and aluminum comes in a lot of the kit versions of Axial's SCX10s. I am not a big fan of Axial's 1.9 shocks. Love their 2.2s, but not such a fan of their 1.9s. I feel like the bore is too small. Great shaft, great construction. They don't seem to have very much plush to them. They're very stiff and very springy. That could be me not adjusting them correctly, but right now I'm talking about an out-of-the-box setup, and out of the box, I'm not a big fan. That's why I do not have them on my Dingo. I am indeed running the 2.2 axial shocks. These are like for the Wraith and the AX10. Large bore, a little bit more height, just a little bit silkier performance. I personally like the 2.2 shocks from Axial more than the 1.9s. Not scale, whatever. I like these better. So much, in fact, that I got rid of the 1.9 versions of the Axial shocks and put these on. The Ascender shocks, however, are amazing in 1.9s. They have the greatest action. It's not even evident right here from the compression. They just perform so great out in the field. Really amazingly, you get them, you feel them in your shop, and you kind of get an idea how they're going to perform, and you take them out and they perform completely different than how they would appear. Both shocks, the SCX10 and the Ascender, I both filled them with stock oil, which is around 25 to 30 for the Ascender and the SCX10 both. So I flipped it over to talk about the axle, and while I'm down here I'm going to discuss the whole drive line and everything that's going on down the bottom. This is the SCX10. We'll start at the front axle. You get a plastic axle. Comes with every kit. You get a plastic axle. You get plastic C-hubs and knuckles up on the front end. All this is supported by decent metal screws, and in the front of both you get aluminum steering linkage to mount up to your servos wherever their servo may be. Got a steel axle running to a steel differential in this Axial version, with no access point in the front, whereas on the Vaterra version there is an access point up front. That gear cover can be removed to get in and access your differential to add grease or whatever maintenance you need to do. The high steer knuckles give improved turning radius. I mean, that's pretty crazy, as opposed to that's all you get for Axial, which is not bad, but the Ascender definitely outsteers the Axial. The Ascender axle housing is a much thinner, but basically holds the same steel axle going through to the steel differential. However, this is locked to the drive shaft as opposed to the Axial version, which is just attached via this locking pin. So you can change the drive shaft in the field here if anything goes wrong. If you're in the field here and something goes wrong with this drive shaft, you're pretty much screwed, because it's screwed into the pinion on the inside of the axle. So that's going to take a little work to do any maintenance. So hopefully this is built well enough so that you won't have to do anything like that. You can detach the two halves of the drive shaft and do some small maintenance if needed, so that's always a good thing. For the lower links, Axial gives you a solid piece, whereas Vaterra gives you one solid piece and a spacer to make up the difference. Vaterra does this so that you can build the kit to the size that you want, whether it be short, small, or whatever. That's the thing about Vaterra's kit with the extendable wheelbase. They have a lot of spacers in order to make the body the size you need it. It's not actually just a large body, but it's a bunch of accommodations to make the body larger. In both cases, the drive shafts run down to the motors in a pretty standard way, and the motor is set centrally under a skid plate on both models. That's pretty much it there. Vaterra gives you metal links upper and lower, whereas Axial in its stock form gives you plastic links, and Axial also gives you 3-link front and 4-link rear, all plastic, whereas Vaterra gives you metal all the way around, as I said. Same deal going on in the back of both models. You have a plastic axle housing with metal axles on the inside, plastic axle lockouts for the rear, and this same setup with your lower links and your shocks on both models. The only difference is on the rear you have the access point as well on the ascender for any maintenance that you may need to do inside the rear axle. Both models offer brush guards on the bottoms. Vaterra's are slightly more adjustable. Not sure what benefit that is, but they move around. It's a 3-piece design. On the Axial model, they're just planted by one post, and the whole piece is one solid piece. A lot of guys like to get rid of these posts. I know I have on several vehicles gotten rid of these posts and put aluminum on to add a lot more strength. A lot of guys also put the brush guards in steel. I personally don't do that. I like the bendiness of it, the forgivingness of it. So I leave mine in plastic, but regardless, both kit versions come with all plastic brush guards. So flipping back over and going back to the front of the SCX10, you have your receiver box behind the servo, and just behind your shock mounting hoops, which are both plastic. Same deal on the ascender with the plastic shock hoops, but behind the shock hoops on the ascender is the battery tray. In between the shock hoops on the ascender comes a little shock hoop brace, which is pretty neat. This is an aftermarket thing that a lot of guys use on the SCX10. Stops any flex from going on here and gives your shocks a little bit more stability. Gives them a little something to push against as they moving and doing their actions. So that's a great addition that's not present on the SCX10. The battery tray behind the shock hoops is a pretty neat thing on the Vaterra. The battery can also be placed up front in the SCX10, and the hardware to do this is included in the kit. This kit is built in accordance to Dingo stocks, and they ask you to put the battery in the back, so that's why the battery is in the back. And that's also why this weight block is up front to compensate for the battery in the back. There's quite a bit of lead weight in there, and kind of balances the battery out and gives me a little more push in the front to give a little dig, which is the reason why a lot of guys put the battery in front to add weight to the front. So you can put the battery in the front on the SCX10, but the difference is on the ascender, the battery mount actually floats on the axle. So as the body is moving, the battery is kind of just sitting on the axle. You can see it moving up and down as the axle moves, independent of the chassis. That's a good thing because the battery is only putting weight to the axle, whereas opposed to weighting the whole front end and giving the shocks a little extra load to have to deal with. That's a unique thing from Vaterra. They're the only ones on the market doing this right now, and that's a pretty neat addition. It's one of their flagship features, and it's pretty neat design. I was a bit skeptical of it at first, but it works very well. Yeah, that's the battery mount. The bad thing about the Vaterra battery mount is that they don't allow you to use a standard size 2S LiPo pack. You have to use a shorty pack, which required me to buy new batteries. Not a big deal for me because I needed batteries, so it's someone who doesn't perhaps need batteries that could be a big deal. I think some other very small batteries could fit in there, but they would have limited run time, so pretty much going to need a battery solution for this Ascender. So since there's no battery behind the shocks on the SCX10, they put the receiver box there. Inside the receiver box holds obviously the receiver and any bit of small electronics you can fit in there. In this particular box I have the light controller, and that's just about it. This receiver box isn't particularly large, and then stuck to the receiver box is the ESC. This is not the smallest ESC, of course, that you could use, but behind the receiver box on the SCX10 is the transmission. Both models have forward-facing transmissions. However, the Dingo's transmission is to the left, while Ascender's transmission is to the right. The argument is for torque twists, etc., etc. It's a whole other conversation that I choose not to get into right now. The transmissions are basically the same until you start adding the capability to go 2-speed. The Ascender has the ability to add a 2-speed transmission and a slot for servo right there on top of the transmission. Whereas on the Axial transmission, you would have to buy a whole new transmission box and a couple new gears. Still need to buy the gears for the Vaterra, but the box is already there and ready to mount your servo on. Axial does offer a 2-speed transmission for the SCX10. It's just an optional aftermarket sort of thing. Not aftermarket, it's an Axial product, but it's an add-on, it's a hop-up. You have to buy it separately. So, and of course, since the battery's not up front on the Dingo here, it is in the back, and it does take a full-size battery with 2 straps. The Ascender instead in the back holds all the electronics with the large, extra large receiver box and the body posts. This receiver box is pretty much cavernous by industry standards. It holds my receiver and has plenty of space for extra. The one thing about it is the wiring is a little hard. It has kind of a lock channel in order to stop air. Air kind of stops water from coming in it, theoretically, but kind of waterproof. You could probably put a receiver, and the BEC could probably fit in there as well. I just left it out for wiring purposes. So I'm finally to the back of the vehicle, and the back bumpers are pretty much the same except for the way they're held on. Along with the front bumpers, I forgot to mention, they're attached drastically different ways. The SCX10 bumper is attached to the frame by this back mount, and then the bumper actually attaches to the mount. Whereas on the Ascender, both the front and the back mounts are screwed directly into a piece, which is mounted onto the sides of the Ascender. I think this was to give it that extra length. You get an extra, 2 inches of space there by having this little extender bar coming off of the chassis here. So that's what gives Ascender a lot of its length in the front and the rear, are these 2 bars that are sitting there on the back. So that's how the bumpers are attached, and other than that, they're pretty much the same. Again, you have spaces for lights on the front and the rear. 2 lights there, 2 lights there, Ascender and SCX10. And again, you have the little tow hitches on the rear. Last thing is the chassis. Certainly not the last comparison to be made. There are tons of things that I didn't cover so far, but just to keep this relatively short, I wanted to just touch on the basics and lightly go over everything that's going on in the truck. But as I said, lastly, I'm going to cover the chassis. They both C-channel frames on both vehicles. You can see this C-channel frame here and there's Vaterra's C-channel frame, SCX10 Ascender. The difference is that Vaterra's frame actually comes in 4 pieces. You've got 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces, 4 pieces. And the reason Vaterra's comes in 4 pieces is so that you can move this in and out and create one of 4 different wheelbases. This is what I was saying and why I compared it to the Dingo. This is the largest wheelbase for the Ascender, and the Ascender can easily be brought down to this size wheelbase, and I think maybe even a little bit smaller. So Vaterra has included a bunch of spacers, as I was talking about before, that allows you to change the size of your vehicle. So you take some of the link spacers out and remove some of the spacers in the front and rear bumpers, and you can easily change the size of your vehicle, which is a big draw for some. I guess for customization, you want to change your body and it's too small, you can easily shrink your Ascender up. Not for me, but could be for some. Maybe it will be for me in some future when I see a really nice body that I can't fit on my Ascender, and then I can just change the height, the size, the wheelbase. So maybe a good thing, but it is what it is. That's Ascender's feature. So I just touched on the slightest of differences with the Vaterra Ascender and the Axial SCX10. This is the Dingo version. There's tons more I could have talked about, could have gone a little more in depth about the plastic components, the quality of the plastics, the front suspension setup on the Vaterra is a little unique, but that's a long conversation in itself. Just a lot more, but as I said, I touched on the basics. These two trucks are very similar, but they're also very different. And as people ask me which one I like better and which is a better truck, I can't really say. They each have their own unique characteristics, but in some strange aspect they're exactly the same. So I guess you just have to drive both and make your own choice.